I've just checked. I think we're almost at 60 million downloads. Yeah, which is, to be honest, quite impressive. I never expected that. I don't actually know why. So the first project that I was involved with is, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is my own project. Because I was looking for, like, me and a colleague, Martin Opdam, we worked on this, and then at some point I felt like, hey, this is actually pretty cool. There's nothing available right now on the internet. And we thought, like, let's try to make it open source, or, you know, just publish the source code in some form, which started with Codeplex, obviously. So when we put it on Codeplex, we were hoping to get a lot of contributions, because we thought, like, okay, maybe, you know, maybe at some point we'll get some traction and then people can contribute to it, because that's the whole point. But I think it was still based on the Team Foundation server source control system. And even for ourselves, was very difficult to develop the project. You had to create batch files, if I'm not mistaken. It's a long time ago. And it was very horrible to work with, because just the two of us trying to create the right batch files was painful, let alone other people trying to contribute in that way. It didn't really work. So in general, what will happen is people would file an issue or request, and we would do the work, because yeah, we would push directly. Well, I'm using the word push now. It's weird, because that didn't even exist at that time. We all used to Git now. But at that time, yeah, we would directly commit. I think it's the term in TFS that you had to use, the changes directly. So it didn't really go well. I mean, people were downloading it, and then at some point we pushed it to NuGet. That made a difference. Then we started to see a couple of downloads, like 10, 20, maybe 100 after a couple of months. Yeah, one of the things which is always painful if you're an open source contributor or even actively working on projects is to find the time in the evening or in between, you know, to work on it. 10 years ago, I didn't have children. Now I have children, of course, and that consumes a lot of time. I also have lots of interest. I mean, FluentAssertions is not the only open source project. I have a couple of other ones, which I'm not that active with, but I also have the intention of the blog regularly about my experiences. It is difficult. It's not every evening that I'm really looking forward to sit behind my machine again, because, you know, everybody knows it in the COVID time frames. You already spend way more time behind your screen. Every meeting is a screen time. So in the evening, sometimes I'm tired. But in general, yeah, I still try to contribute. We're really actively working on FluentAssertions 6, and there's a lot of refactoring that I do. I use my project also for workshops. I give more workshops about maintainable code. And quite often I use the code itself as an example. And while demonstrating and talking about maintainability, I discover, like, hey, wait a second, that's actually a technical debt. We should fix that in the next version. So this is something that I'm doing actually in the last couple of weeks. So one of the questions I sometimes hear is, like, what was the trigger to contribute to open source? Honestly, I don't have a clue. I don't remember. It was just fun. I remember that there was this very lively group of people on open source, but just that the fact that there was something that I liked and I saw value in could help other people to use. And I mean, I use open source a lot myself, but there was never really any deep, I don't know, deep sense of, I don't know, nothing behind that. We just, yeah, thought, like, let's put it there. Maybe somebody else would like it. You know, and then in the beginning, you start to see the downloads, and it becomes like, hey, this is cool. We actually got like 100 downloads now. So somebody is using it, you know, and then it becomes thousands. And at some point you reach hundreds of thousands. And then, you know, you reach the point where other people actually building extensions on top of your own library, which is like, whoa, why would you do that? I mean, it's just a simple library. And then people from Microsoft reach out and say, yeah, we also use it in the .NET SDK. Like, what? Why would you do that? You know, and then blog posts are being written, and then somebody, you know, tweets about a Pluralsight training they did about your library. Like, dude, man, it's just a simple assertion library. Who cares? But apparently it's getting traction now. So one of the reasons that why I created FluentAssertions is because I care about unit testing. In fact, I care about maintainable code, and code is maintainable when it's easy to read. You know, you have this statement about people read actually your code 9 times or 10 times more than you write code. So then what you do, you optimize for reading. And I think I remember that I was triggered by a couple of articles that Jeremy Miller wrote, I think in 2006 or 7, like Jeremy's first law of TDD, second law of TDD. And at the same time, I was reading a book by Jimmy Nielsen about domain-driven design in .NET. And that is when I started like, hey, this is really awesome. Unit testing on itself is already awesome. But the fact that you start to write your test first, you know, you start to use your test as almost like specifications, but you can read them as documentation. Then I started thinking about, okay, but now I want to make my assertions also really readable and self-explanatory. And if it fails, I want to have a clear explanation. Of course, we had extension methods in .NET, and of course, there's a fancy new tool. I remember that. I was looking for a more fluent API. I like the whole idea of a fluent API. And I still do that. I still do presentations about, you know, doing test-driven development without shooting yourself in the foot. And it's almost always about finding the right scope of a test, but also to make sure that your tests are readable. You know, that the cause and effect, the intent, you know, the functional the behavior that you're actually trying to validate. And having good unit tests or good readable assertions is part of that part. One of the things I often tell my clients if they work on something which they think is not absolutely core business and it could be useful for other people, I quite often encourage them to make it open source, put it on GitHub or something like that. And they always ask me like, what's the benefit of it? And I said like, okay, but you might actually get contributions, but it's also an incentive for the developers in your company to deliver something that they're proud of. So for me, it definitely is the case. I use the code that I write for Fluent Assertions is not just, at least from my opinion, in my opinion, good code because I want the library to be good, but I also use it as examples. You know, when I present about maintainable code or I talk about TDD or topics like that, I use Fluent Assertions itself as an example. You know, as I said, I did a presentation about technical depth and design patterns, and then I show them like how a simple API in Fluent Assertion, which was just one class, evolved over the years in a whole chain of, you know, strategy implementations, but it didn't change the test scope. So I also use it for that kind of examples. And if I show the code to people, even for the unit test, you know, this is one of the guiding principles of the library, that people can actually look at the tests of the library to understand how to get the most out of the library. If somebody creates a pull request, that usually already takes them quite a lot of work to add it. If it's a simple thing, it's usually not that problem. There's a couple of things we need to consider. We want that code to be on the same level as all the other code. We want it to be covered correctly by unit tests. We want to make sure that the documentation is also updated because otherwise it's behind. We also want the release notes, which we store in source control, to be updated. So that's already quite a burden for a lot of people. And then and usually if we ask them like, okay, are you willing to update release notes or maybe update add an example, they're fine with that. But if it becomes a discussion about consistency or breaking changes or something that we don't feel fits in the library, then it becomes painful. Quite often people say, you know, I understand this bit of an edge case. I understand if you don't want to or don't want to accept it, I can create my own extensions or I can even build my own contribution library. But sometimes people, you know, really join the Slack channel and start like extremely complicated apostles to explain why they need to do that. You know, as an example, we recently had somebody complaining about the fact that we were doing blocking or dealing with asynchronous code by actually waiting on that, by creating our own synchronization context, really complicated stuff. And they didn't agree with it. They thought that it's fundamentally wrong. This person was right in a sense, but it would be very risky because we ran into deadlocks in the past. We were really afraid to change that. That is a difficult discussion because this person was adamant about changing it. We accepted the change and agreed to do a kind of an alpha version to get some feedback because he's right. And you don't want to discourage people. Sometimes you have to. That is the responsibility. I mean, sometimes it's like a real project. Sometimes you have to disappoint your users or clients because you don't want to deliver something because it doesn't fit in your philosophy or your direction or your roadmap. Same thing with an open source project. It is a project with all the responsibilities and all the things you have to think about.